Cowboy Bebop is my favorite anime, though it's not hard to be that when I only really enjoy maybe 3 total. But there's something special about this show that I haven't been able to find anywhere else. I've rewatched this series more times than I can count, so I figured why not rank all the episodes to see how I actually feel about each one. Spoiler warning for every single episode, so go watch it now and then come back if you haven't seen it already. Or just rewatch it for the billionth time. I can't think of a better way to spend 9 hours, especially to get refreshed for this video. But anyway, let's get into the ranking. Starting off the list in 26th place is Session 20, Perot Le Fou, or Requiem for a Clown. This is the first of the really bizarre episodes that I'll be talking about, and I think it's the least interesting one when you consider the main focus of the show, which is the characters. The premise is definitely very interesting, and the tone this episode captures is unlike any other. So it is a very standout episode, but not quite in the same way as the other standouts. Session 20 stands out to me because of its weirdness, rather than how impactful or emotional it is, which could be a lot more effective in a different show, but not Bebop. This whole episode comes about because of a complete coincidence with Spike being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it doesn't really impact the overall narrative or alter our understanding of the main cast in any meaningful way. Spike gets beaten up a comical amount, but without the emotional weight of episode 5. He's in life or death situations like many other episodes, but again, without the emotional weight or the fun factor. There's no bounty to catch and no consequences or lasting repercussions. This episode has all the strangest parts of the show without the emotional framing to make it relevant and truly enjoyable to the viewer. There is a pretty delicious bit of indirect detail about how Jet cares for Spike, enough to go out of his way to find help from him by tapping into his ISSP contacts. Since he made a clean break with the police, I can't imagine he really wants to get involved with them beyond handing in bounty heads and getting paid for it. Though it's very funny to me that Bob says, "They say nobody who's seen his face has lived to tell of it." So how does anyone know the Mad Perot exists in the first place then? Even if the murders can be connected, how can anyone describe the murderer accurately if everyone who's seen his face has died? How would anyone know he appears and leaves with a smile? At least one person would have had to have encountered him and survived. I think the washed out, desaturated look the artists went for in this episode is the weakest of any of them because it's so bland and uninteresting. Every single episode has at least one gorgeous shot, but this episode lacks that, which is something that holds it back. It certainly is a very unique one, but the uniqueness they went for here makes it my least enjoyable episode. Next up in 25th place is Session 2, Stray Dog Strut. In a similar vein as Halloween 2 is to the original from 1978, this episode is basically more of the same of the first, which makes it feel a bit less fresh than that one. Especially compared to the sheer magnificence of the later episodes, or even the humble yet exciting beginning, this one didn't really do anything to stand out, and we basically just get another 20 minutes of Spike and Jet, which I'll never really complain about, but the twist they go for here with adding in Ein just isn't as interesting or captivating as nearly every other episode. I'd have a more favorable outlook if Ein was used a bit more liberally throughout the show to actually have an impact, but he only ever gets a handful of scenes where he gets to be legitimately relevant and important. I honestly think Ed could have been introduced in this episode, and then we'd have 7 more episodes with her, not to mention that this one would be a hell of a lot more interesting. What does this episode really mean in the grand scheme of the show? It's kind of funny how Hakim can kick a door off its hinges and bust all the glass with no visible effort, but the pig he punches when the thief gets away barely moves. The cigarette sign when Ein first gets away from Spike because of the dog whistle says cigarette, but also misspells tobacco as tobacco with a K instead of 2 C's. One thing this episode can claim is being the first to feature Big Shot, which is cool. Overall, this is a decent episode, but decent is only good enough to save it from the bottom spot on my list. It's very run-of-the-mill Bebop and kind of boring in comparison to the first episode or anything later on. In 24th place is Session 14, Bohemian Rhapsody. This is the first episode where Ed actually has a meaningful role since her introduction in episode 9, which really sucks because I just want more of her. She's so fun to watch. And while her role is important in the context of this episode's plot, as it allows the Bebop crew to locate Hex, she's relegated to the background for a lot of the runtime. On the other hand, one amazing development this allows for Jet is showing us that he already feels protective of Ed, his fatherly instincts and desire for family taking over easily. The way the business suit says harassment as harassment is very funny to me. I've never heard anybody pronounce it like that. On that same note, why wouldn't the suits ask Jet to just take his cigarette butt with him? The head guy had turned to face him while he put it out on their plan, so it's not like he didn't see Jet doing that. It's also remarkable that Jet is actually able to puff on it, and that somehow doesn't ruin the electronics inside. How do the squatters and drifters in the space junk area continue to get food and other supplies? Wouldn't they need to go to other planets and interact with governments and cops to get what they need after even just a couple days? And how does the air not eventually run out? Maybe there's some kind of carbon dioxide recycler or something that creates new breathable air, but those parts would also break down over time, so again, they'd have to go to other planets. We do see some vegetation and plants growing in the debris, so maybe there's some kind of plant like a tree or something that's doing all the work, but you need a lot of those in order to process the carbon dioxide that's produced from even just a couple of living organisms, let alone however many people are living there for however long they are. I find it kind of funny that Jonathan is cut off twice in this episode, once by the elevator doors closing and the next time by his communication shutting off. Overall, Bohemian Rhapsody is a step above the two below it due to Jeff's development at the end and having the entire crew together by this point. Coming in at 23rd is Session 11, Toys in the Attic. This is the second of the bizarre episodes and is the only one where it's just the Bebop crew. There's a live reading by the main cast from a Comic-Con panel on YouTube that you can watch, and it's really fun to see the acting happening behind the animation. The person who uploaded it also synced it up fairly well with the episode itself, so you can really get a feel for how things are going throughout the episode. It's very fun to watch. Spike saying he warned Jet not to play against Faye is a great line since we saw him being cheated by her in episode 3. I love when characters talk about and reference previous events that the audience was there to witness alongside them. How do Spike and Faye know where to go to find Jet when he triggers the alarm? I guess he could have told them where he was going before heading there, but the Bebop by any eye is a pretty large ship, and I sincerely doubt the only alarm is in that storage area. Another aspect I don't really understand is why the mutant lobster is able to make the characters lose their attentiveness and make them forget what's going on. The device Spike uses to see heat signatures makes him resemble Vash the Stampede from Trigun quite a bit. This episode isn't the worst one since we get all the crew members and some more interactions between them, but what does it really add to the show overall? It's one of the two episodes I feel are the closest to filler Cowboy Bebop ever gets. Though it's also the closest it ever comes to having an actual alien. It starts very episodic and then ends with everything completely resolved and no lasting consequences or character growth or insight to speak of. Number 22 is incidentally Session 22, Cowboy Funk. While this episode might not directly relate to any of the main character stories, it's a pretty entertaining one all the same, seeing Spike faced with someone who's essentially just him but slightly different. A Spike who is a little more go with the flow, to the point where Andy's even more similar to Faye in terms of coming and going as he pleases and not settling down to one thing for very long, though apparently long enough for his name to become at least partially well known. It's essentially subtle Spike versus in-your-face Spike. Cowboy Funk is great for showing why an unregulated bounty hunting system would be pretty awful for our society. any infighting results in tons of collateral destruction when you have trigger-happy idiots who lose their tempers easily. The thing I like most about this episode is that it's a lovely contrast between Teddy Bomber's intent behind bombing buildings and what Spike and Andy actually care about. They couldn't give less of a fuck about the state of society at large when their prides are wounded. Why does Jet seem surprised that Andy actually looks like an old western cowboy when he clearly looks the exact same in the picture that Ed pulls up? I can understand Faye not believing the horse since she hasn't seen it in the picture, but Andy is wearing his full getup in the image, so where's the surprise coming in? Another question I have is, what is this costume party that seemingly anyone can just show up at? Were Spike, Faye, and Jet invited? I really doubt it. I can understand Teddy Bomber going after it because it looks like a party of the rich and elite, but that begs the question again, how did the Bebop crew get in? Spike's line, "You are one person who I could never forgive," is the first of two very unnatural line readings in the show. The other one in a much earlier episode that I'll be talking about later on. Just about every piece of dialogue in Bebop is delivered incredibly humanely and naturalistic, but this one sounds like it was read off a script. It's a pretty fun episode, but also easy watching in that it doesn't challenge anything we know about the world or characters, simply reinforcing what we've already known for many episodes at this point. And I just can't get enough of the emotional weight of the episodes that come in higher up the list. 21st place goes to Session 21, Boogie Woogie Feng Shui. I think this episode would work much better being the first one to dive into Jet's story, with episode 10 coming after, and then episode 16. It feels the lightest of all of them, which contrasts sharply with the heavier tone each episode slowly takes on for Faye and Spike. This is the story of the daughter of a friend of his that he met one time. It's not directly related to or legitimately personal to him. I think it's a mark of how little this story matters that the MacGuffin they're looking for, the Sunstone, is just in the mouth of some random statue somewhere that Jet and Meifa just happen to stumble across. No pomp or circumstance. It's funny that they still have the Piyoko chocolates from episode 9, and enough of them that Ed has a bunch on the platter she offers Meifa. I don't get why Spike and Faye are holding cans for ashtrays when they're standing outside after Jet kicks them out for smoking around Meifa. Can't they just ash their cigarettes wherever? I mean, they're outside. This isn't the last time a character does this either. I wonder if Spike was able to light his cigarette from the burner here because of the practice he got from using the flamethrower in episode 11. A detail I'd love to know is how Pow got stuck in hyperspace. It actually reminds me of Warhammer 40k and Event Horizon, with that crew getting trapped in the warp. Jet asks for Lao Chu at the drink place, which is the same thing that Hakeem asks for in episode 2. This isn't a bad episode by any means, but there are plenty that come before and after, which I just find to be more engaging. In 20th place is Session 17, Mushroom Samba. It's sad to me that Ed's episodes just aren't as emotionally engaging as the best Bebop has to offer, but I suppose that does fit her character pretty well. They're all fun and whimsical, perfect for such a lighthearted character. This episode does reveal a good bit about Spike, Faye, and Jet through their trips, with Spike always fighting an uphill battle against his past and constantly reaching for the light, but never quite getting there. Faye drowning in debt as a small fish in a huge ocean, with every other fish passing her by without a glance, and Jet just wanting a family to call his own, blood or otherwise. None of their problems are very big in reality, but absolutely massive in their own minds. I don't have any idea what the frog is supposed to be in Spike's trip though. I do like that the watermelon was brought up to the cop's office along with that bounty hunter though. It's a funny little detail. I'm assuming the cop brought it up as evidence or something, but it is really strange. It took me until this rewatch to realize that the cop is the same voice for Rint from episode 10, and what made the connection in my mind was the "hey" he exclaims after seeing her driving away. This episode is so not serious that the male bounty hunter is torn between chasing after the child he believes made him lose his bounty or finishing his fucking dessert. The stakes might never have been lower in the entire show than in that moment. This episode plays into what I brought up earlier about Ed and Ein's introduction being combined. They work exceptionally well as a duo here, and it's wonderful to see Ein actually being helpful. In 19th place is Session 4, Gateway Shuffle. It has the initial partnership of Faye and the Bebop crew, which is very fun to watch. It's also the first time we see Spike using the plasma cannon on the swordfish. Twinkle Murdoch has got to be one of the weirdest targets in any episode. She's kinda creepy. Her skeletal body is perfectly paired with the very unsettling way she laughs to make for one hell of an off-putting character. I love how many times events incidentally line up, like Murdoch's bounty being blocked and then Spike's soda exploding in his face. The subtle way that the team behind Bebop highlights and punctuates important moments is wonderful to witness. The action sequence in hyperspace here is one of the best in the show, though the other weird line reading comes in here, with Spike saying, "It's multiple warheads, and this is not the military!" Just bad. Again, this episode isn't the best, but it is far from the worst. Next up, in 18th place, is Session 23, Brain Scratch. This episode is the one that I think shows Bebop's age above all. Back when it was made, TV was the thing everyone was worried about rotting your brain, but the internet has completely eclipsed TV simply in sheer reach, and there are plenty of studies available now which show at least to some degree the massive negative impact the internet has on people's minds, especially children. This topic and the scratch movement would actually work better in a modern internet age, as streaming and VR will legitimately have the capacity to get it out to as large an audience as possible. I find Brain Scratch to be structured exceptionally well, using that structure as a way to further drive home the message it's trying to convey. It overloads the viewer with tons of info right off the bat to really get you into the feeling of watching TV. It does have a couple of mistakes though. When the female TV host is discussing the Brain Dream VR game console with the doctor, the bottom left corner says multilingual, when it should say multilingual with a U before the A. And the bottom of the screen when Faye is being broadcast says, "This program is being broadcast in 12 different language," when it should say languages, which weirdly enough is a repeated mistake from episode 9. The text scroll at the bottom of the screen during one of the random shows says, "There is a nice present show in the last of this program," which just sounds very awkward grammatically. Big Shot is always a fun addition to any episode, and seeing Judy break character is good for a laugh every time I see it. It's also fantastic to see a tender side to Ed at the end. She's not just an eccentric genius, she has a very good heart. These precious few moments are what solidified her as my favorite character in the show. 17th place goes to Session 19, Wild Horses. There's so many moments in the show that make me intensely curious about little details, like the story behind Doohan giving Spike the swordfish and how they met in the first place. Was Spike still in the syndicate at that point? Did he simply stumble upon Doohan's shot one day after an intense bounty hunt? It takes a lot of guts to leave things open-ended for the viewer to imagine on their own. And I love when entertainment respects my intelligence enough to know it doesn't need to spell everything out. My favorite shot in the entire show is in this episode. A stunningly jaw-dropping shot of Doohan's space shuttle. The color contrast is off the charts, and the use of negative space is masterful. I was kind of surprised at how little I have to say about Wild Horses, but ultimately I think it's a very solid Bebop episode, if a bit plain in comparison to the entries higher up on the list. In 16th place, I have Session 9, Jamming with Edward. Like I mentioned when talking about episode 2, I hate that it takes 9 episodes for Ed to finally show up. She could have easily been introduced with Ein. She's my favorite character, as I said, and I take anything extra with her. There are so many throwaway lines which are very tantalizing flashes into aspects of the universe that I'd love to know, like South America simply being called an off-limits area formerly called South America. I find it kind of funny that Yuri says the government is hiding things from us. If the government really believes it was just some prank by a hacker, why would they put an 8 million Wulong reward on the culprit? It could be as simple as the government believing that someone of that level could hack into the computer systems they currently use if they're able to accomplish that. But if that isn't the case, maybe Yuri has more of a point than you're coaxed into believing by him being depicted as a very cliche conspiracy theorist, tinfoil hat and all. The news anchor does propose the idea that hackers could use the satellites to sharpen their skills, but I don't see why those hackers would really be deterred from getting better if they didn't have the satellites. It's not like the hackers sprang into existence the moment those satellites were sent into orbit, like they were just sitting around, and as soon as they saw them in the sky, they were like, fuck yeah, this is what I've been waiting for! So I don't think that satisfactorily explains it, though I could easily be wrong here. Like I said in the Brain Scratch entry, this episode also has the mistake of this program is being broadcast in 12 different languages. I love Melissa Fahn's reading of "There's zillions of them and they've all got kill lasers." It's so bright and cheery and completely at odds with the gravity of what the crew is about to attempt, which is such a wonderful split the team behind Bebop were able to maintain with Ed. Overall, this is a good introduction to her character, but it could have happened much earlier. Coming in at 15th place is Session 12, Jupiter Jazz Part 1. It's really great how this episode foreshadows Vicious' return against the Van in his attempt to take over the Syndicate with his line, "It's up to me to sever them all." I also like the subtle detail of Vicious deriding the Van's way of running the Syndicate and the outdated, decrepit nature they put in place. But he uses a sword in a world of guns! What a fantastic juxtaposition. I have to wonder why Spike and Jet allow Faye to keep coming back when she continuously pulls stunts like stealing their antifreeze and their money, meager as it is. She fully adopts the mantra, "What's yours is mine and what's mine is mine," which she shows off again when she goes straight for Gren's liquor when he takes a shower. And speaking of Gren, one of my favorite details from this episode is that the song he plays when we first see him is called "Goodnight Julia," which is incredible because it's never named in the show and fits so perfectly for the scene and point in the story we're at. Perfectly highlights how Bebop tells its story, through very subtle details and letting the viewer put the pieces together. Something that doesn't make any sense to me is how characters refer to the city they're in, Blue Crow. Spike is told Gren plays the sax, quote, "at the Blue Crow," which I don't know about you, but that sounds way more like a specific bar or place than a whole city. What does this even mean? That Gren randomly plays all over town? How does that info help anyone? It's so non-specific, you might as well just say he plays sax on the moon of Callisto. Wouldn't it make sense to just say he plays at the Rester House, since that's the actual name of the bar? Going off of that, while in the bar, the frames of Faye sneezing with her face and hair pointing in opposite directions is really funny to pause on. This episode draws a lot of parallels between Faye and Spike. Both go to Callisto, Spike to find his past and Faye to escape hers, Spike trying to find a single person but getting attacked by a large mob unwillingly, and Faye wanting to run into a large crowd of random people but initially not finding anybody. There's a close-up on Spike's face when he arrives on Callisto that shows both his eyes being the same color, which is a little disappointing, especially given how episode 13 ends with a direct reference to his eyes being different colors. On the other hand, him punching the pipe when mistaken for Vicious is a great setup for the payoff of him punching the broken building in episode 22 and causing Annie to give up. This episode just edges out jamming with Edward because of what it sets up in episode 13. 14th place is Session 10, Ganymede Elegy. This is the first episode focused on Jet in the show, and I love the somber, mature nature they took for his story. It really sets it apart from the rest of the Bebop crew. They all have issues to deal with, but they're drawn together through loneliness. I will say that it's kind of disappointing that Jet's first episode wraps up that plot in a single one instead of going over a couple of them, but I guess it does make thematic sense. He's at a much different stage of life than Spike or Faye, and especially Ed, so he's had much longer to come to terms with his demons. I don't know why Donnelly asked Jet when he got in, when the whole reason they're contacting the control tower is to land, which means they just got to Ganymede. Another oddity where Donnelly is involved is when Spike asks about the bounty for Rint when he can clearly see it under his picture. And did they really need 1 billion cops to show up just to arrest Rint? There's only one person, and he was already detained. It reminds me of the chase scene in the original Blues Brothers movie, where the cop cars keep driving off the bridge endlessly. The little detail of the Hammerhead's engine flare is fantastic when you think about the later episode where Spike is getting the swordfish fixed at Doohan's, and Doohan knows his engine is good when it makes that same flare. I don't know if the Hammerhead and the swordfish use the same engine, but it's a nice detail. Definitely a great episode. Breaking through the top half of the list, in 13th place is Session 6, Sympathy for the Devil. This is the last of the bizarre episodes that I'll be talking about, and I don't find them to be as engaging, though episode 6 is the best of the three. Cowboy Bebop has no aliens, despite being a show set in outer space, not counting whatever the mutated rock lobster is in episode 11. These episodes are the aliens, because they're kind of foreign and separate from the rest. There's no real explanation for why the kid not kid is able to age because of the Moongate explosion, though I do really appreciate that they tied more into it than just Faye's accident. But why does that mean he can't die and has a Wolverine-type healing factor that makes him recover instantly from being shot? Jet says it's melatonin on overdrive, but again, why does that negate the gunshot he clearly suffers? The amount of blood left behind when Spike shoots him in the warehouse is comical, so clearly it's not this minor injury that can be brushed off with a kiss and a band-aid. I love the shot of the kid crashing into the gas pump though. The city in the distance and fading golden as though its luster is dying, but still there. A perfect metaphor for science fiction. This is the first bang from Spike, and I think him adding "as if" to the end of his line about how he understands what the kid is saying as the kid dies means he doesn't believe in the same reason to keep going as the kid, who wants to be remembered, and that Spike isn't ready to move on yet. This entire show, from the very beginning to the very end, is Spike coming to terms with his past and learning how to move on from it and let it go. I guess when I think about it, some of these episodes are just mirrors for Spike to see himself and understand who he is so he can move on. Episode 22, Andy. Episode 6, the kid, whatever his name is. Episode 20, the Mad Perot. I guess that does make episode 20 a little bit better when I can frame it like that, but I still find it to be I can't really say worst, because I don't think there's any truly bad episodes in this show, but least good, I suppose. Next up at 12th place is Session 3, Honky Tonk Woman. And this is so much more entertaining in terms of long-term enjoyment and rewatchability on its own as an introductory episode than Ain's. Faye has a ton of bluster and plays big and hard, but she has just as little idea of what she's doing as anybody else. You immediately understand so much of who she is. A subtle detail that I appreciate is that Faye is the only bounty head Spike and Jet ever keep in the bathroom. Any other ones they pick up later are stored somewhere else, like they learned from Faye getting loose. The Big O is the second of the three anime I mentioned I like. Spike shows up as Roger Smith, the main character, and Gordon is Big Ear, his constant informant. Another fun tie to the Big O is Faye's call to automatically start her ship. Okay, showtime. Ed also says this in episode 18 when the beta deck is all set up. This episode gives us an early look at the understanding Jet has of Spike. He warns Spike to be careful and not get caught off guard when he goes to meet up with Gordon's henchmen. I love how the version of Rush that plays when Spike and the henchmen make the exchange is a little off from the one played in episode 1, the song that frames the main action section where Spike and Jet work like clockwork and it's jazz. Here, Faye is a new variable in their routine, and so the song and vibe is all off, but not completely lost. End to end, Honky Tonk Woman is thoroughly enjoyable and a fantastic introduction to Faye. In 11th place is Session 15, My Funny Valentine. This is the lesser of Faye's 2 episodes exploring her past, in my opinion. This one does tell a very good story, but I think episode 24 is just far more emotionally gripping than almost any other episode. If the doctor and his assistant are actually established in a real hospital, then how many women have they tried this scam on? Does Whitney collect a ton of debt and then pawn it off on people, or is Faye the first person he's done this to? Given that there's a full-blown security system that Faye trips off when she tries to escape on foot, I'm wondering if the entire hospital is corrupt. Also, how did none of the other staff in the hospital notice that Faye was escaping? Whitney's question, "What do you get from running away?" is the question at the heart of Faye's story until she regains her memory, and the answer is escaping pain temporarily. I really wonder about Whitney's claim that the tattoo on his neck is an ID for the everyday person. We only ever see criminals with it in episode 16 and nobody else, so how much water does that really hold? This is also reinforced later when Jet captures Whitney and they reunite, where Faye pulls his head down to look at his neck and knows it's him just by seeing the tattoo. If they were really so common, just seeing it wouldn't mean anything. It seems like Whitney's tattoo is more of a prison thing than anything else. One other strange thing with Whitney is the screen that shows all the debts transferred to Faye. Pizza is the only word visible for the top charge for what looks like 6,500 woolongs. Then it misspells purchase as purchase with a second C instead of an S in the 4th and 7th charges. And all of the rightmost column entries say no paid instead of not paid. Spike doesn't take any of Faye's shit this episode, completely trivializing her flashbangs by simply flying around them, and his advice to her about the past not mattering shuts her down so well. It also comes back deliciously in the final episode. Now, the first episode to break the top 10 is Session 7, Heavy Metal Queen, and boy do I have so much to say about this one. It was kind of surprising to see how much I put down for this one. The first time going through the series, I knew that music was a big part of it, though I didn't understand just how important it is to the show, and I was delighted to find that heavy metal is one of the featured genres. It does suck that Cowboy Bebop was made before my true metal love, post-grunge, so it couldn't even be considered during the making of the show. I've never been a fan of that style of singing. It's very specific to the 80s, that hair metal style. There were plenty of great metal bands at the time singing in regular voices that they could have pulled from, or even the grunge era. I do 100% agree with VT's line about the music being soothing though. Metal is my favorite music genre. I am a metalhead at the end of the day. And it's exceptionally satisfying and gratifying to hear the emotions and thoughts I don't know how to process, externalized in such a visceral way, which is why I lean into the evil sounding metal and shy away from the more flashy pop sound like the hair metal this episode is referencing. But honestly, every instrument does sound fantastic and an instrumental would be incredible. One thing I love about this show's use of sci-fi is that it sort of drops the fiction part of the genre, instead going for a much more realistic look at the future of space travel. It's most likely not going to be this glamorous affair for the regular everyday person, which Golden Age shows like the Jetsons would have you believe, and instead basically more of the same and worse, since you have to imagine that corporations are even more wildly unchecked than they are now, or will be, while stuck on Earth with regulatory bodies all around them, supposedly constantly hounding them and breathing down their backs. Bob basically confirms this in episode 4 when he says the ISSP is stretched extremely thin for criminal activity simply because of the vastness of space. At this point, with AI and self-driving cars, the most unrealistic part of this episode is truck drivers still existing and not entirely replaced with self-driving vehicles or just matter teleportation. You could argue it's unionization or whatever, but like the police, you have to imagine that they're stretched so thin compared to these businesses with tons of resources, even more so in this futuristic age. Even self-driving vehicles might not be that realistic at the point in time that this show is portraying. They might have just already come up with matter teleportation at this point. It's great to see Spike in a very unglamorous position, hungover, pants down, on the toilet, coming off the previous episodes painting him to be the quintessential badass. The contrast is beautiful. We see him taken down in previous episodes, but it's always framed as him not trying or having some kind of plan. One detail I'm glad goes unexplained is why VT is so against bounty hunters when she was married to one of the most famous, at least according to this episode. It would have been great to hear his name mentioned a few more times, randomly sprinkled throughout later episodes. Is she bitter because she lost her husband? Did she never like bounty hunters and just put up with his profession because she loved him so much? There's never an answer or even an attempt to answer the question, because ultimately some things are better left unresolved and they're more enjoyable that way. One tiny thing that bothers me is VT putting out a mostly whole cigarette after Spike discovers the swordfish was wrecked. You can clearly see plenty of white on it. It's impossible to not fall in love with the amount of detail the artist put into each scene, and this is especially evident when there's a bit character on screen. There are so many tiny details crammed into each square inch of these backgrounds that you immediately gain a solid understanding of each one, even if they're not on screen for more than 30 seconds. They're a visual feast for the eyes, especially the one guy who looks like he might be familiar with Grey Ash. My favorite detail here is Spike and Faye trying to do things in an unfamiliar way, and they fuck it up, like trying to be delicate. But when they switch tactics and charge straight in without thinking twice, it works out, especially with Spike shooting his gun to correct its trajectory. It's no mistake that this is immediately punctuated by Faye saying, "Bingo." I really enjoy this episode a lot, and it's a fantastic way to start the top 10. In 9th place is Session 16, Black Dog Serenade, and I find this episode to be a more enjoyable exploration of Jet's backstory than episode 10, simply because of the darker, grimmer overtones. My favorite part of Jet's episodes is seeing him fall back into who he used to be, the black dog who bites once and never lets go. His story is a wonderful twist on the hard-boiled cop. Like I talked about earlier, I think it makes sense for this one to be his last. There could have been wonderful subtle detail of each episode slowly getting literally more personal for him by putting the daughter of a friend first, then someone he used to be romantically involved with, and then his arm. It would progressively get more and more physically personal as it got more emotionally personal as well. Just on this rewatch for ranking the episodes, the focus on Jet's arm made me wonder if the inspiration for Automail and Fullmetal Alchemist came from it. It's funny that Fad says this isn't a world for smokers anymore, when all we see is characters left, right, and center smoking their lungs to death. Major characters, minor characters, does not matter. Every single character has a cigarette in their mouth at some point. It seems more like a sign that he specifically doesn't fit in the world anymore, and foreshadows his death at the end of the episode. I really love the transition from the present, with Jet turning down Fad with his cigarette butt facing one way, and then showing another butt in the past but turned the opposite way, signifying the difference in situations this time around. While the one criminal saying, "Welcome to hell," might just be a throwaway line, it really comes across as thematic for what Jet is doing, revisiting one of his worst moments and biggest regrets. Your past can be hell, or it can be pleasant, depending on how you choose to deal with it or ignore it, tying in perfectly with the other main characters. It might sound a bit strange, but I love how even small injuries impact the characters, like Jet being stabbed with Udai's thrown knife and then limping for the rest of the episode. It's just another detail that helps make the characters feel human and real. Black Dog Serenade is the best of Jet's episodes, not just because its title fits so incredibly well with the story that it's telling, but also because of how it connects with other plot points in the show to make it feel like a small story in the much larger picture. Coming in at 8th place is Session 13, Jupiter Jazz Part 2. I wish we could have found out more about the war on Titan. Who is it between? Who are Gren and Vicious fighting for? Why is the war being fought? How long has it been going on? So many questions and absolutely no answers, because it ultimately doesn't matter in the grand scheme of the show. I absolutely love the intentionality behind playing no music and only having the voices from Spike's memories just before he wakes up. The soundtrack is overall very subdued, and the viewer becomes accustomed to that. So when nothing is there, it stands out greatly, and it makes you lean in closer to pay attention. The lack of sound, ironically, highlights the most important scenes. Going back to my point from episode 12, Jet asks about the Orlando apartments, which is where Gren lives. If he was able to get that specific of information about Gren just by randomly asking around, why was Spike only able to find out that Gren plays sax in the town he's currently searching? The song Words That We Couldn't Say fits so incredibly well with the different character relationships that are explored in this episode. Jet and Spike, Gren and Vicious, Spike and Vicious. Every character interaction is perfectly summarized in this single song. It's fantastic that we get to see a different shit for each major character. though Vicious is probably the ugliest. How exactly is he able to pilot his ship back to the Syndicates when an entire side was blown off? Wouldn't it go spiraling down until it crashed into the ground? One other question I have is asked by Ed. Why does she get left out of so many episodes? Give me more of her, please! Why couldn't we have more of her in every episode? Besides those two questions, though, this is a very strong entry. 7th place on my list goes to the episode that kicked off the show, Session 1, Asteroid Blues. It is a perfect introduction to Spike and Jet. Spike runs ahead and underestimates his targets, gets caught out, and then wisens up and gets serious, and Jet works behind the scenes with a steady hand, ready to provide support at every turn. The first time I watched the show, I thought, this is what everyone was raving about? I did not understand it at all. But the slow start is exactly what Bebop needed as a baseline. This is the average day for Spike and Jet, and what we can learn to expect. I find it to be such an interesting touch to start Bebop with a series of alternating clips to set up the story before the opening sequence. This is the very first thing anybody new to the show is seeing, so they have no idea what to expect, and I love that they immediately go for the most important thing in the show. It starts with Spike's memories and his reason for living, his past with Julia, and flashes into the circumstances of their meeting, which would be expanded on later, and it sets the tone for the show in such a marvelous way. In the opening, Spike is bleeding a ton as his rose changes from monochrome to red, immediately setting up Spike's later line that he's bled all that blood away to Vicious in episode 5, and is wonderful because we were there to see it happen. So it feels like a very personal line, not just between the two, but also the viewer. Everyone and their mother has talked about the show to some extent, and especially the point I'm about to bring up. But I love how the music throughout the show is able to intimately control the viewer's emotions, especially Rush in the first episode. God, that song is so good. Rush and Tank are the two songs that I continuously listen to over and over and over again, because they are I think they're objectively the best songs in the show. There are plenty of really good songs throughout the entire show, but damn, those two, just, oof, perfect songs. As a famous YouTuber once said, the music of Bebop separates the idea of excitement from volume. The action sequences in Bebop are so much fun to watch, and the music is critical to that. Yoko Kanno is a genius. 6th place goes to Session 18, Speak Like a Child. This is how the main character's backstories should progress in my eyes. Starting in a small place with low emotional but high collateral stakes, and each episode slowly reversing that. Faye and Spike capture this perfectly, though Jet's episodes vary in effectiveness, and Ed's don't have any emotional stakes until her very last episode, which coincides with Faye's last one. If Ed's story had been wrapped up by itself, I don't think it would have been as good. I find the balance this episode strikes between the main characters works exceptionally well. It might be primarily about Faye's story, but Spike and Jet aren't pushed to the background at all, and in fact are the drivers of this episode's narrative. Rather than an A plot and a B plot, there's basically the foreground A plot, which is Spike and Jet trying to find a beta deck, and the background A plot of Faye's history. We get to see Spike and Jet's friendship on full display while not leaving Faye and Ed behind. I love how Jet smirks like he won when Faye decides to not pay the COD charges in order to watch the beta tape, but he's still out 30,000 woolongs at the end of the day. Even being Faye's acquaintance before she regains her memory is a costly endeavor, let alone a friend. Now that we're multiple years past the date when Jet read all data is missing, I wonder what saved the 2023 data and on from being lost. The end credits screen for the show the Retro Nerd is watching says executive instead of executive. It's missing the U. The ending to this episode is absolutely killer, but it's also the lead up to a payoff that doesn't come for another 6 episodes. And that payoff is some of the best 20 minutes of television I've ever seen. My top 5 are practically airtight end to end, and Speak Like a Child just misses out. Getting to the top 5 of my list now. Number 5 is Session 8, Waltz for Venus. Honestly, this is the kind of episode that makes me feel embarrassed and ashamed to watch modern TV. It has such a beautiful and succinct story told in 20 minutes, where way too many massively produced shows with millions of dollars for their budget can't get you to care about their characters in a full season. Episode 8 is the most rewatchable in my opinion because you don't have to see a single other episode to know exactly what's going on. The story is contained here, and that story is beautiful. Every character is utilized well, the soundtrack is phenomenal, the action is tight and focused, and every single frame works towards the crescendo of Rocco being shot. And Rocco, let me tell you, he is an immediately lovable character who gets better as the episode progresses and we get to see more of him. I would go as far as saying he is the best single episode character in the series. It's a little odd that he says Spike will get hurt if he rushes him with a knife, when Rocco already tried that and Spike had no idea Rocco would be coming after him. Spike's description of his fighting technique sounds quite a bit like Ultra Instinct from Dragon Ball Super. But on another note, I don't think we needed to see Rocco's flashbacks to watching Spike. We were there with him when they happened not that long ago, so we know he'd be channeling that energy. Though this is followed up wonderfully with Rocco being shot and the bullet also killing the music, which by no coincidence coincides with the gray ash falling to the ground. It and Rocco's hope for his sister being killed as well. What I keep coming back to with all of these entries is the density of the indirect detail the show is packed with. So many little details fill so many roles, and it makes me giddy to see such fantastic writing on display. Speaking of gray ash, it's a little funny to think that Jet made such a big deal about the gray ash seeds, but somehow Spike is able to sell them for Stella's treatment with no comment on the difficulty. It could be attributed to his underworld connections from his syndicate days, but that doesn't make sense to me since he should be dead to that entire world. Just a strange mystery. Faye's bit in all this is very entertaining as well, though it's wild that a whole ass fucking 12 by 12 looking ceiling beam came crashing down just because she shot a comical amount of guns out of people's hands before anyone even thought of using those guns. What actually caused that beam to fall? It's not like her bullet even hit the beam. She also gets a very good joke where she's shoving a gun into someone's mouth, and when he's unable to speak clearly because of that, she says she can't understand him and forces the gun in more. It just makes me laugh every time. Spike's line about Faye being a little more delicate is fantastic, coming right off of Heavy Metal Queen, where she states she's not the delicate type. Reinforcement of character interactions is a beautiful thing to behold, except when it keeps happening over and over and over again. This is the 50th time it's happened. This episode stayed at second place, right up until I got to 3 of the placements above this one. And it's insane what this team is consistently able to do in only 20 minutes. Coming in at 4th place is Session 24, Hard Luck Woman. And wow, this is easily Faye and Ed's best episode, and it's not particularly close. If you thought I had a lot to say about Session 7, wait till I get into this one. The more I watch Cowboy Bebop, the slimmer the line gets for me between Spike and Faye's stories because they're both so incredibly well written. All the characters are impeccably done, but those two stand above the rest. I absolutely love how the tenderness and caring that Faye always had in her is initially masked by the hardened bounty hunter she's had to become from the day she was unfrozen, and slowly we learn how she used to be. That old persona is built up more and more until it's finally able to break free and come to the surface. Everything that we get to see of Faye after this episode is an epilogue to her character, and a very subtle hint that she will continue on past the show's end, because this is where her story finishes. This is the kind of writing that makes me burst with joy and satisfaction, the kind that both inspires me to create something of that quality and intimidates me that I won't be able to. When Faye meets her old friend Sally, she doesn't tell Sally and her granddaughter that she feels she doesn't belong in their world anymore, or that the weight of all the history she didn't exist in is too much for her to deal with. She just performs her famous disappearing act. I'm 100% sure Sally would tell her granddaughter about Faye anyway, but it makes it easier for Faye to deal with in the moment. This is my favorite kind of writing, because it lets the viewer be intelligent and form their own conclusions. We're given the facts of what actually happens, concrete events, things characters say or do, and what the world looks like, but not the emotions, the motivations, all the internal stuff. I love stories, and my favorites are ones that have mastered indirect detail and baked it into every inch, ones that were built with it from the very beginning. And Cowboy Bebop has that in spades. One thing I'm not sure on is why Ed doesn't recognize the waterfall the first time she sees the tape. I also don't know why she trusts Faye to give her something wonderfully, tremendously good when she was burned by her in one of their first interactions. Maybe she's just that carefree? Another thing that doesn't make sense to me is why the nun tells Ed the hologram of her dad is in the top drawer if there's only one drawer for that table. I hate that Ed says she might not be coming back. Obviously, she's not coming back. Although, when I think about it, if someone wanted to cash in on the everlasting love for this show, a good way to do that might be with an Ed spinoff. She's even given that potential show a name multiple times, Cowgirl Ed. The end card for this episode says, "See you, Cowgirl, someday, somewhere." So it's all right there. It would be perfect. And if the right team of people came together to do it, I think it could legitimately work. But I doubt it's ever going to be done. Everybody talks about Ed's name, but what about her dad's? Appledairy, Sheiknees, Hesap Lutfen. What a fucking name that is. And I wonder if he gave it to himself like Ed created her own name. Like father, like daughter, I suppose. It's probably where she got it from. Speaking of, why does the egg that Appledairy throws at Spike's gun make it useless? Wouldn't he just be able to shoot with it anyway? While Spike might resemble Vash from Trigun with the heat-reading goggles on, Appledairy's assistant McIntyre looks exactly like him. I also find it funny how McIntyre uses an ashtray, like Spike and Faye did in episode 21. Why do these people care so much about their ashes falling on the ground? It might even be a little more ridiculous here because the meteor showers wreck the surface of the Earth every 2 days, as Jet points out. Overall, the stuff with Appledairy isn't utilized enough in this episode in my opinion, but the sheer magnitude and weight of Faye's payoff completely holds this episode up near the very top, but not quite enough to make it into my top 3. Now, if you're an avid Bebop fan, you probably know by now that my top 3 revolve around one specific character, and I'll have you know, I don't give a shit. You and I both know these 3 are the best episodes, no question about it. In third place, taking the bronze medal is Session 5, Ballad of Fallen Angels. I love how Spike asks about Jet's arm here, setting up that Chekhov's gun perfectly for episode 16 to follow up on. The one shot of Jet's face and profile when he's searching up Mao Yenrai looks oddly like the one of Spike facing the opposite way in the final episode. One thing I do wish for is even just a tiny flashback to show any kind of interaction between Mao, Annie, Spike, and Vicious. A little too much is riding on the implication of their relationships, instead of showing anything for you to get a real understanding of the emotions and weight behind them. In contrast to this though, I absolutely love the way Spike's history is shown to the viewer. The minimalism and non-linearity of it is just enough to convey a piece of the puzzle, but never the full picture. One of my favorite scenes in the entire show is when the goon holding Faye tells Spike to lower his gun, and we see Spike continue to hold it up. Then the goon says, "What's wrong if you don't comply?" And as soon as the gun says comply, Spike shoots him through the head, putting a bullet through compliance. That is Spike epitomized in a single shot. Damn, what an incredible scene. One thing I wish the artists had done is shown Spike's eyes as different colors many more times throughout the show, like I mentioned in previous entries. Like in the shot where he's talking to Annie and she brings up Mao after telling him off for being a stubborn show-off. Or when Faye calls the Bebop to be rescued and Spike says it's possible he'll come. The camera is directly focused on his eyes in those moments, and it would have been great to see that Spike's heterochromia throughout the show in random scenes instead of just when the artist wanted you to see it. This was the first time I watched the ending teaser for the next episode, and for some reason, Spike is angrily talking about lids.
Everyone's putting a lid on something that smells. The world. What's going on in the world? With all these lids, the world is gonna be buried in lids. It's all those lids. I'm gonna crush them all away.
It caught me very off guard and made me laugh at just how random it is and how angry Spike is. The second place silver medal goes to session 25, The Real Folk Blues Part 1. Perhaps the biggest reason why the voice acting in this show is almost universally top tier is because the actors were in the studio with each other, so they were able to actually play off each other in very natural and conversational tones, and this is exemplified in Spike and Julia's interactions. In that panel on YouTube I mentioned earlier, Mary McGlynn talks about how she fell in love with Spike as she worked on the show, and it's heartwarming to think that she fell so hard for the character that she ended up marrying the man who performed the definitive voice for him. Honestly, another potentially really cool spin-off is something around the Red Dragon Syndicate. It would work very well if it was set before Spike and Vicious joined, since that wouldn't have any effect on the Bebop story. I'd just love to see more of this faction. When I really think about it, Spike is either being intentional when he chooses to become a bounty hunter or completely stupid. His name is obviously going to reach criminal circles, but if that's what he wants, then it makes sense. But if he faked his death to get out of the syndicate, why would he want his name out there? Shouldn't he at least go by a different name? Faye volunteering to protect the Bebop is such a wonderful bit of growth for her. She had to be harshly scolded by Jet for not caring about the ship before, and now in a complete 180, she's disregarding Jet's concerns about being able to fly. Once she's gained some kind of home, the switch is turned in her head. As incredible as this episode is, it's the first half of possibly the best episode of television to ever air. And that second half is the crown jewel of the series. And coming in at number 1, to probably nobody's surprise, to claim the gold medal is the final episode, session 26, The Real Folk Blues Part 2. What can even be said about this one that hasn't been said a billion times already? The quality of the writing is completely self-evident. It's the perfect conclusion to a masterpiece. I love how unreadable Spike's face is when Julie is embracing him in the graveyard. To me, it says that he can't let himself feel happy yet because he knows it's not over. He has to settle things with Vicious if he ever hopes to truly have what he wants. It's great that Faye holds a gun to Spike in order to get him to stay. She may have remembered her past, but she still doesn't quite know how to convey her feelings, and this is the result of her past and present finally colliding, but not quite coalescing just yet. I fucking love that Spike is killed. This is the end of the story. No space for sequels. A story that isn't afraid to have a hard and fast ending is beautiful, and it should be celebrated. And yes, Spike does die at the end. To believe anything else is delusional and completely defeats the point of the show and what it was working toward from the very beginning montage and Spike talking about death with Laughing Bull. The single thing, the only thing I would change about this ending is letting Spike fall to the ground and then having silence for a few seconds before the outro song plays. I'm not the biggest fan of it immediately starting up the second he hits the floor, though blue is the perfect capstone. The first time I watched Bebop all the way through, I was emotionally devastated and laid in bed for multiple hours doing nothing but trying to process what I'd witnessed. I knew I'd just finished one of the greatest pieces of art I would ever see, and it was kind of overwhelming how much I emotionally resonated with it. Session 26 is the culmination of the previous 25 episodes, and it was never going to be anything but number 1. And that's my list of all 26 episodes of Cowboy Bebop ranked. This video ended up being way longer than I thought it would be, and my voice is starting to give out. But there's so much to talk about in a series as rich in detail as this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.